Have you ever wondered what goes through someone's mind when you simply disappear? Not just stepping away for a while, but fully cutting off all contact. No texts, no calls, no explanations. One day, you're there, and the next, you're gone, as if you never existed. Here's the uncomfortable truth. They've grown far too comfortable with your presence. They believed you'd always be around, regardless of how they treated you. Your energy, your attention, and your time became things they thought they could rely on forever. But what happens when you make the choice to walk away? As Epictetus once said, "Don't explain your philosophy, embody it." This quote isn't just about living with integrity, it's about understanding when something no longer aligns with who you are and having the courage to step away from it. For too long, you've been holding on, acting as though their approval was the air you breathed. But ask yourself, have they ever treated you with the same devotion? Or did they take you for granted, assuming you'd always be there no matter what? The moment you remove yourself from the equation is the moment everything changes. When the calls go unanswered and the texts stay unseen, they'll begin to feel it. The power balance they were once so sure of crumbles. Suddenly, the certainty they had about you fades, leaving behind uncertainty, anxiety, and regret. Marcus Aurelius captured it well. The universe is change. Our life is what our thoughts make it. They never saw your departure coming, and now that change leaves them spiraling, questioning what they did to lose you. One moment, they had the upper hand, and the next, they're stuck trying to figure out whether they lost you for good. Your absence doesn't just leave a void, it forces them to confront the reality of who they are without you. They'll realize that you're no longer the ones staying up, wondering if they care. Now, they're the ones who can't sleep, haunted by the emptiness you've left behind. When you were constantly available, they thought they had you all figured out. They believed they could predict your every move, like a game they could play on their own terms. But when you vanish, the rules change. They're left asking themselves a terrifying question. What if this time they're really gone? It's like the ground has vanished beneath their feet. Their sense of control, gone. Their ego, shattered. Now, all they can do is replay every interaction, searching for the moment they went too far. But it's too late. Seneca reminds us, we suffer more often in imagination than in reality. And that's exactly what will happen to them. The silence you leave behind will speak louder than any confrontation ever could. You're not disappearing to punish or manipulate them. You're reclaiming your energy and reminding yourself that your worth isn't measured by how much space you occupy in someone's life. Sometimes, your absence is the strongest statement you can make. Imagine this. You were always the one initiating conversations, showing up when they needed you, and giving without expecting much in return. Meanwhile, they treated your presence as a convenience, something they could enjoy whenever they pleased. But now, one day, you're just gone. No calls, no texts, nothing. And that's when it hits them. For the first time, they'll feel the loss. They'll realize that they were never in control. They just thought they were. Their confidence will falter, and doubt will creep in. They'll start questioning their every move, wondering what they did wrong and whether it's too late to make things right. And here's the shift. The power is now yours. So, I challenge you, step away. Not to punish, but to liberate yourself. Let them feel what life is like without the person they took for granted. And if they come back, trying to pull you back into the same dynamic, you'll know that you are no longer just an option. You're the prize. If you're ready to take control of your life and stop chasing people who don't value you, Drop "I reclaim my power" in the comments. Let this be the moment you choose yourself over the illusion of approval. Now, let's dive into the 9 things they'll experience when you leave without a word. Believe me, they never saw it coming, and it will shake them in ways they never expected. Because your absence. It's not just empty space. It's a deafening silence they can't ignore. And the longer you stay away, the more desperately they'll try to win you back. This is the shift you never thought you were capable of. Number 1. Shock and confusion. When you suddenly disappear from someone's life, the first emotion they feel is pure shock. It's an emotional jolt that leaves them scrambling for answers. People tend to expect stability and continuity in their relationships, assuming that others will always be present, especially if you've been a consistent part of their life. Your sudden absence disrupts this expectation, causing deep confusion. It's like walking on solid ground, only to have it vanish beneath their feet without warning. They are left disoriented, struggling to make sense of the abrupt change. Marcus Aurelius once said, "Everything we hear is an opinion, not a fact. Everything we see is a perspective, not the truth." In their confusion, they grasp at every possible explanation, trying to understand your sudden departure, but none of it feels certain. The initial wave of shock hits hard because they never expected your absence. People often grow too comfortable in relationships, assuming that things will remain the same without effort. Your sudden disappearance forces them to confront a reality they were not prepared for. They were certain you would always be there. In their mind, your presence was guaranteed, a permanent fixture in their life. Now that you are gone, they feel destabilized, questioning the foundation they thought they could rely on. Epictetus teaches, "When someone acts badly towards you, view it as a misstep of theirs, not a reflection on your worth." This sudden disruption of their expectations is not just about you leaving, it's about them facing their own misjudgment and overconfidence. Their mind races to make sense of the silence. Without any warning signs, they search for meaning in your absence. They start replaying every interaction, every conversation, and every detail, looking for signs they might have missed. Every moment, even the smallest ones, is scrutinized under the weight of regret. Were you distant the last time you spoke? Was your last message shorter than usual? Now these insignificant moments take on new meaning in their mind, feeding their confusion. Man is disturbed not by things, but by the views he takes of them, Epictetus reminds us. In the absence of clarity, their imagination runs wild, creating stories and scenarios that only deepen their sense of uncertainty. This emotional upheaval leaves them stranded in a fog of doubt. They are left wondering if they did something wrong, but the more they search for answers, the less clarity they find. It is unsettling because there is no closure, no conversation that wraps everything up neatly. Unlike a fight or a breakup, where emotions are aired and finality is understood, your disappearance is an unsolved mystery. It forces them to sit with their discomfort and wrestle with the unknown. Seneca once said, "He who is brave is free." And in this moment, your absence becomes an act of bravery, your way of freeing yourself from the expectations and limitations others imposed on you, even if they are left trapped in confusion. They also start to feel the practical consequences of your absence. It's not just the loss of a person, but the loss of routine. If you were the one they leaned on emotionally, or someone who reached out regularly, the absence of these small interactions feels like a crack in their daily life. They might instinctively reach for their phone to send you a message, only to remember that you're no longer there to respond. Your absence leaves a noticeable void, one they never expected to feel so deeply. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Loss is nothing else but change, and change is nature's delight." But in the midst of their shock, they can't yet appreciate the necessity of this change. Instead, they feel as though part of their world has crumbled without warning. This sense of confusion is often accompanied by emotional whiplash. One moment, they might feel hurt and betrayed, wondering why you would leave without any explanation. The next moment, they may lash out internally, feeling angry and resentful. They accuse you of being selfish or unreasonable for vanishing without a word. But beneath that anger lies something much deeper, the sting of rejection and the fear that they never really mattered to you. We suffer more often in imagination than in reality, Seneca reminds us, and they are now caught in a cycle of imagined pain, replaying moments that may not even matter in the grand scheme of things. This emotional turbulence forces them to confront uncomfortable truths about how they treated you. It acts as a wake-up call they never expected. They begin to realize the ways they may have taken you for granted, assuming your presence was guaranteed. It's a painful realization, but it's one they can't escape now. They start to see how their actions, or lack of action, might have pushed you away. As Marcus Aurelius wisely said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Your departure becomes an event beyond their control, leaving them with only one option: to reflect on themselves. In the end, the shock of your disappearance forces them to confront a version of reality they never anticipated. They are left with unanswered questions, emotional turbulence, and an emptiness they don't know how to fill. Whether they learn from this experience or remain stuck in confusion is beyond your control. What matters is that your decision to leave is an act of reclaiming your peace. You are no longer bound by the expectations they placed on you. In the silence of your absence, they must now grapple with the consequences of their assumptions. Your choice to step away may be painful for them, but it serves as a reminder that nothing should ever be taken for granted, least of all another person's presence. Number 2. Ego crash. When you disappear without a word, one of the first things they experience is the collapse of their ego. People often assume that others will always be available, no matter how they behave, and that confidence creates a false sense of control. When you remove yourself from their life, the foundation of that belief crumbles. What they thought was a predictable dynamic, where you would always be there to respond, support, or care, is gone, leaving them in a state of disarray. As Marcus Aurelius wisely said, "Accept it. You were born for change. Nothing belongs to you, but all is in flux." They thought they had control, but life is constantly shifting, and your absence forces them to confront this unsettling truth. Ego thrives on predictability. As long as you were present, they felt secure in their dominance, believing they knew exactly how you would react and behave. Your absence blindsides them. It's not just the loss of a person, it's the loss of the power they thought they had over you. Their sense of importance was tied to the idea that you would always be available, and when that illusion shatters, so does their confidence. They're left questioning the assumptions they once held about themselves and the role they played in your life. Seneca put it best: "You act like mortals in all that you fear, and like immortals in all that you desire." They desired control over you, acting as if it would last forever, but now they're forced to face the reality that nothing is guaranteed. The absence of your presence serves as a mirror, reflecting the insecurities they were able to suppress when they thought they had control. Suddenly, they are no longer the one who determines the course of your interactions. They realize they may not have been as significant to you as they once believed, and that thought bruises their ego. It forces them to confront a deeply uncomfortable truth. They were more dependent on your attention than they were willing to admit. This is where they begin to experience a loss of identity, wondering if the confidence they displayed was real or simply a product of the power they thought they held over you. When you were available, they may have acted indifferent, believing that no matter how they treated you, you would still be around. But now, in your absence, their sense of superiority evaporates. The ego, which thrives on certainty and control, is thrown into chaos. They replay past interactions, searching for the moment when things shifted, hoping to pinpoint where they went wrong. The longer you stay away, the more intensely they obsess over this loss of control. They are haunted by a fear they never anticipated. What if you're truly gone for good? Epictetus reminds us, it is not events that disturb people, but their judgments about them. In this case, it's not just your disappearance that causes them pain. It's their interpretation of what it means and the power they've lost. This process often leads them to a painful realization. They were never as in control as they thought. Your absence strips them of the belief that they were indispensable. It reveals how much of their confidence was built on the false assurance that you would always be there, no matter what. Now they feel exposed, vulnerable, and unprepared to deal with the consequences. The dynamic they relied on has collapsed, and they are forced to grapple with the uncomfortable fact that the relationship was not as one-sided as they believed. This ego crash is profound because it challenges their view of themselves. It makes them confront their own flaws and insecurities, things they were able to hide behind their sense of control. As Marcus Aurelius said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." They must now come to terms with the fact that the only thing they can truly control is their reaction to your absence. For the first time, they are forced to face the consequences of taking someone for granted, and that realization is more painful than they ever imagined. Number 3. Doubt and regret. When you disappear from someone's life without explanation, one of the most powerful emotions they experience is doubt, followed closely by regret. In the silence you leave behind, they begin to overanalyze every interaction, every message, and every conversation you shared. They start to wonder if there were signs they missed, moments when they could have shown more care or responded differently. The mind becomes a relentless echo chamber of what-ifs and if-onlys. They begin to question whether they misunderstood you, overlooked your feelings, or took your kindness for granted. In your absence, all these unresolved questions come rushing in, filling the void you left behind with a haunting sense of uncertainty. Regret is a heavy burden to carry, especially when it creeps in too late. As Seneca wisely said, "Every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end." They may realize that they had every chance to treat you better, but now that opportunity has slipped away and they must live with the consequences. Your disappearance brings an uncomfortable clarity. Moments they once dismissed as trivial now seem like missed opportunities. A conversation they brushed off, a text they ignored, or a time they put their needs above yours suddenly carries more weight. They begin to understand that these small moments, these seemingly insignificant actions, were the foundation of your relationship. Now that you're gone, they feel the sting of each neglected moment and unspoken apology. Your silence forces them to reflect, and in doing so, they are confronted with their shortcomings. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury. By stepping away without confrontation, you embody this principle. You didn't argue, you didn't beg for recognition. You simply disappeared, leaving them with nothing to hold on to but their own thoughts. This is when doubt takes root. They begin to question whether they ever truly knew you, or whether they misjudged your tolerance for their behavior. They thought you'd always be there, and now they can't help but wonder what they did to push you away. Regret and doubt often come hand in hand. They replay scenarios in their mind, asking themselves if one more text or call could have changed the outcome. They question whether they said something wrong, whether their actions were too careless, or whether their neglect was noticed more than they realized. The mind, driven by regret, can be merciless. In the words of Epictetus, it is impossible for a man to learn what he thinks he already knows. Only now, in your absence, do they realize how little they understood about your needs and boundaries. The very things that they thought were small or unimportant are now the focal points of their regret. This reflection leads to a painful realization. They didn't see your value until it was too late. They thought they had all the time in the world to make things right, but your disappearance disrupts that illusion. Now, they are left wondering if they've lost you for good. The thought that they may never have another chance to apologize or reconnect becomes an ever-present weight on their mind. This is the price of their complacency, thinking that you would always be there, waiting, regardless of how they treated you. In Stoic philosophy, there's a deep awareness of impermanence. As Marcus Aurelius reminds us, you could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think. Your absence serves as a lesson in the fleeting nature of human relationships. Nothing is guaranteed. Not even the people we assume will always stay. This truth stirs up regret in them as they realize they should have appreciated you when they had the chance. The silence you leave behind forces them to sit with their own thoughts, and there's no escaping the uncomfortable emotions that arise. They doubt their own actions and intentions, questioning whether they gave you any reason to stay. Regret creeps in like a shadow, following them wherever they go. They understand now that they were playing a game they could not win because they underestimated the stakes. In the end, the weight of doubt and regret becomes their burden to carry, and they can only hope they'll find peace within themselves, or the courage to do better in the relationships they still have left. Number 4. Insecurity creeps. When you disappear from someone's life without a word, one of the most powerful emotions they experience is insecurity. They begin to question everything about themselves and their place in your life. What once felt certain and predictable is now shrouded in doubt. Their mind races with endless questions. Are you happier without them? Have you found someone better? Were they not good enough? Your absence forces them to confront the reality that they were not as important to you as they thought. This realization is unsettling, especially for those who believed they had control over your attention and emotions. Insecurity, once dormant, now takes center stage. Marcus Aurelius once said, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." This quote encapsulates the mental spiral they go through. With no access to your thoughts or intentions, their mind fills the silence with worst-case scenarios. Every imagined possibility, that you've moved on, that you no longer think about them, or that someone else has taken their place, gnaws at their sense of self-worth. They start believing that if they were truly enough for you, you wouldn't have left without a trace. The mind, left unchecked, becomes a powerful source of suffering, amplifying doubts and fears that may have never crossed their mind before your disappearance. In your absence, every interaction they have with others becomes a point of comparison. They wonder if the things you once liked about them are now trivial in the eyes of someone new in your life. They might even question if their flaws or mistakes were the reason you left, replaying every moment they took for granted, hoping to pinpoint where things went wrong. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus reminds us, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." For them, your silence triggers a cascade of reactions, self-doubt, overthinking and insecurity that reveal their internal struggle. Without realizing it, they become consumed by the fear of losing not only you, but also the version of themselves they believed was enough. They begin to wonder what life is like on your side of the absence. Are you thriving without them? Are you happier now that you've stepped away? These questions are torturous because they shine a light on their deepest fear, that you no longer need them, and perhaps you never did. The insecurity that creeps in forces them to face the uncomfortable truth that they may not have been as essential to you as they assumed. And here lies the real power of your silence. It exposes the fragility of their ego and shows them just how dependent they were on your validation. Seneca once said, "We are more often frightened than hurt, and we suffer more from imagination than from reality." Their mind becomes trapped in this cycle of imagined scenarios, magnifying their insecurities. Even if you didn't leave because of something they did, they will convince themselves that they are to blame. In their search for closure, they won't realize that closure is not something you owe them. It's something they must find within themselves. Your absence leaves a void, and that void is now filled with self-doubt and the haunting thought that they may never be enough for anyone, not just you. This insecurity can manifest in different ways. Some may overcompensate, trying to prove their worth to others or even to themselves. Others may retreat inward, isolating themselves in fear of experiencing similar rejection again. Either way, your absence becomes a mirror, forcing them to confront insecurities they had previously buried. As they wrestle with these emotions, they may come to understand the truth in another of Epictetus's teachings. No man is free who is not master of himself. In your absence, they come to realize that they never had mastery over their own sense of worth. Their confidence was dependent on your presence, and now that you're gone, they are left with the uncomfortable task of rebuilding their self-esteem from within. Insecurity, when triggered by someone's disappearance, is not just about the loss of a relationship. It's a loss of identity. They must now figure out who they are without your constant validation. Your silence becomes a wake-up call, forcing them to confront the uncomfortable reality that their sense of self was tied too closely to your presence. This emotional journey, though painful, holds a valuable Stoic lesson. As Marcus Aurelius once reflected, the happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts. In the end, the insecurity they feel is a reflection of their own thoughts and perceptions, not a judgment of their worth. Whether they grow from this experience or continue to spiral in doubt depends entirely on how they choose to respond to your absence. Number 5. A sense of emptiness. When someone who was always present suddenly disappears, it creates a profound sense of emptiness that is impossible to ignore. This emptiness goes beyond just missing someone's company. It forces the person left behind to confront the void that has now taken root in their life. It's often said that people only realize the value of something once it's gone, and this truth hits hard in these moments. The small things they once took for granted, your texts, calls, and simple presence, now become painfully noticeable in their absence. They start to understand that those seemingly insignificant gestures were, in fact, threads holding together parts of their life. This emptiness becomes an unsettling reminder of how much space you occupied, emotionally and mentally. Marcus Aurelius once said, "The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts." With your absence, their thoughts take a sharp turn toward the negative, as they are left to grapple with what life feels like without you. They never prepared for this absence. It catches them off guard. The moments they once breezed through, assuming you'd always be there, now feel hollow and incomplete. Their daily routines are interrupted by memories of you, reminders of how effortlessly they depended on your presence to provide comfort, reassurance, and stability. This sudden void also reveals how reliant they were on you, though they may not have recognized it at the time. When you were available, they might have treated your presence as just another convenience, something that required no effort to maintain. But now, with you gone, they can't shake the emptiness that fills the space you used to occupy. Epictetus wisely observed, "He who is not satisfied with a little is satisfied with nothing." In your absence, they are forced to reckon with the fact that what they had was enough all along, but they failed to appreciate it while it was within reach. The emptiness isn't just a lack of communication or interaction, it's a deeper void, one that makes them reflect on the emotional safety you provided. They start to realize that your presence was a source of stability, even if they never openly acknowledged it. Now that you've disappeared, they feel untethered, uncertain of how to fill the gap you left behind. They may try to distract themselves, throwing themselves into work, friendships, or other pursuits. But no matter how much they try, the emptiness remains, quietly reminding them of your absence. This absence also triggers a deeper emotional response, one they didn't expect. It makes them confront the reality of how much they depended on you emotionally, even if they didn't show it. Your presence, which once seemed so ordinary to them, now becomes something precious in hindsight. The silence you've left behind forces them to reflect not just on what they lost, but also on what they failed to nurture. Seneca once said, "What progress, you ask, have I made? I have begun to be a friend to myself." In your absence, they are left alone with their thoughts, compelled to face the uncomfortable truth that they neglected to be a true friend to you when they had the chance. The emptiness becomes a space where regret grows. They realize too late that your presence was not a given, but a gift. With this awareness comes a painful understanding. They miscalculated your value and overestimated their own importance in your life. The silence you leave behind speaks louder than any words ever could. It becomes a powerful lesson, one that teaches them the value of presence, not just being there physically, but showing up emotionally as well. In the end, the emptiness forces them to reflect not only on their relationship with you, but also on themselves. It makes them aware of the things they took for granted and the mistakes they made by assuming you would always be around. Your absence becomes more than just physical. It becomes a mirror, reflecting the gaps in their character and the flaws in how they approached relationships. And as they sit with the emptiness, they come to realize that filling it might not be possible. The person they once thought they could always turn to is no longer there, and the only thing left to do is wrestle with the silence and confront the lessons it carries. Number 6. Obsession over your silence. When you disappear without a word, it creates a unique and unsettling experience for those who once relied on your presence. Your silence becomes a void they cannot fill, and that absence gnaws at their mind. What starts as confusion soon transforms into an obsession. The silence you leave behind acts like an unanswered question. Why did they leave? What went wrong? They become trapped in a loop of thoughts, desperately searching for meaning in every past interaction. In the absence of answers, their imagination takes over, and this is where the real torment begins. Seneca once said, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." Your disappearance forces them into a spiral of self-inflicted pain as they replay memories and conversations, hoping to uncover a reason for your absence. They wonder if they said something wrong, or if there was a specific moment when they failed to meet your expectations. Every small moment, once taken for granted, now becomes magnified under the weight of their overthinking. The mind craves closure, and when it doesn't receive it, it clings to questions that only grow louder in the silence. Your absence acts as a powerful psychological trigger. The things they didn't notice before, how often you called, the warmth of your messages, or your constant presence, now become glaringly obvious. The predictability of your availability is gone, and that disruption leaves them unsettled. Epictetus reminds us, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. But in your absence, their reaction is not calm acceptance, it is obsession. They can't help but think about what went wrong, whether you've moved on or if you're thriving without them. The silence you maintain becomes like a mirror, forcing them to confront their own insecurities and shortcomings. Without the distractions of conversations or interactions, they are left alone with their thoughts. This stillness can feel unbearable, as it forces them to reflect on the ways they may have taken you for granted. They wonder if you are happier without them, if you found someone else who values you more, or if they'll ever hear from you again. Every unanswered question adds fuel to their obsession, creating an endless mental loop they can't escape. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "We are disturbed not by what happens, but by our thoughts about what happens." In this case, it's not your disappearance that haunts them, it's their thoughts about why you disappeared. They obsess over every possibility, imagining scenarios that range from regret to fear, and even jealousy. The silence you leave behind becomes a blank canvas for their mind to paint every possible outcome, and none of those outcomes feel comforting. Their need for control, something they once believed they had over you, now slips through their fingers, and the more they try to understand your silence, the more elusive peace becomes. This obsession grows stronger over time. Initially, they might believe that your absence is temporary, expecting you to return after a few days or weeks. But as time passes and you remain silent, the weight of that silence increases. They start checking their phone more frequently, hoping to see your name appear. Every message left unread and every call unanswered deepens their frustration. They search for signs of your presence online, looking for clues about where you are or how you're doing. The irony is that the more they seek you, the more power your silence holds. Your absence forces them into a kind of withdrawal. They crave the connection they once had with you, but they have no way to satisfy that desire. The silence leaves them vulnerable and anxious, making them question things they never questioned before. As time stretches on, they begin to realize that you've taken something with you, something they can't get back without your willingness to return. In that realization lies the most painful truth. They never really had control over you. They just thought they did. This obsession over your silence is, at its core, a reflection of their own inner turmoil. Your decision to walk away was a powerful act of self-respect, a way of reclaiming your time and energy from someone who failed to appreciate it. And now, in your absence, they are forced to confront their own inadequacies. They realize that they were not as important to you as they believed, and that realization stings more than any words could have. Ultimately, as Marcus Aurelius wisely noted, loss is nothing but change, and change is nature's delight. Your disappearance is not just a loss for them, it is a change, one they never anticipated. And in that change, they are left with nothing but their thoughts, endlessly obsessing over what could have been and what might never be again. Number 7. Loss of control. When you disappear from someone's life without explanation, one of the most profound things they experience is a sudden and overwhelming loss of control. This is because, consciously or not, they had grown used to having power over the dynamic between you. Your availability, your responses, and your presence gave them a sense of predictability, something they assumed would always remain the same. But when you step away without warning, that sense of control slips through their fingers, leaving them disoriented and powerless. The very foundation they built their confidence upon crumbles beneath them. As Marcus Aurelius once said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Realize this, and you will find strength. When you remove yourself from their life, you are no longer participating in the patterns that made them feel secure. Their attempts to predict your behavior or anticipate your responses become futile. What once gave them comfort, a sense of control over your availability, vanishes. They realize, perhaps for the first time, that they never truly had control over you. They merely believed they did, because you were always there. This shift in power creates a deep sense of discomfort for them. The silence you leave behind speaks louder than any confrontation could. It forces them to confront the reality that you are no longer acting according to their expectations or timelines. You've stopped playing the role they cast you in, and now they are left to navigate the emotional fallout alone. The philosopher Epictetus reminds us, freedom is the only worthy goal in life. It is won by disregarding things that lie beyond our control. Your disappearance embodies this philosophy. You've chosen to stop engaging in a dynamic that was never truly in your control and instead focus on what you can command, your own actions and energy. For the person left behind, this loss of control triggers a spiral of thoughts. They begin to wonder why you left, what went wrong, and whether you are gone for good. Their mind will likely race, trying to grasp at explanations, replaying every conversation, every misstep, and every interaction in an attempt to pinpoint where they lost their grip on you. This is where the fear sets in, the terrifying realization that they no longer have the ability to influence your decisions. As Seneca once observed, "No man is free who is not master of himself." The loss of control over you highlights their lack of control over themselves. Their emotions spiral as they try to reconcile the unexpected change, and they are forced to confront their own insecurities. In many ways, your absence teaches them a hard lesson about the impermanence of relationships. The things they took for granted, the attention you gave, the time you invested, are no longer within their reach. This loss disrupts their sense of normalcy, and they are left scrambling to regain a foothold in a situation that no longer caters to their expectations. They might try to reach out, hoping to restore the connection and re-establish some semblance of control, but the dynamic has already shifted. Your silence acts as a reminder that you are no longer operating on their terms, but on your own. This is where true power lies, not in controlling others, but in reclaiming control over yourself. The person who once felt comfortable in their power over you is now faced with the reality that they never had control in the first place. Stoicism teaches us that we suffer not because of external events, but because of the way we interpret them. As Epictetus said, "It is not things that disturb us, but our interpretation of their significance." Your disappearance forces them to reinterpret their assumptions and face the consequences of their actions. Ultimately, the loss of control they feel is a reflection of their own inability to adapt to change. They were never prepared for the possibility that you might leave, and now they are left grappling with the aftermath. This is a powerful shift, not just for them, but for you. By stepping away, you reclaim your autonomy and remind yourself that your worth is not tied to how others perceive or treat you. Their loss of control becomes your gain in self-mastery. Number 8. Fear of finality. When someone realizes that you are truly gone, a deep fear begins to take root. The fear that your absence might be permanent. At first, they may assume you just need some time, believing that you'll come back, as you always have. But as days turn into weeks, and weeks stretch into longer silences, the fear of finality settles in, creeping into their thoughts. They begin to confront the unsettling possibility that this time things are different, that they might have lost you for good. The weight of your disappearance becomes heavier with each passing moment, and with it, the growing anxiety that they missed their chance to make things right. The Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think." This quote serves as a reminder that nothing in life is guaranteed. Not even the people we assume will always be around. Just as life itself is impermanent, so too are relationships. When someone becomes too comfortable with your presence, they forget that you too are free to leave at any moment. Your departure forces them to confront that truth. They begin to understand that relationships are not something to be taken for granted, but are fragile, subject to change at any time. As they sit with the reality of your absence, they realize how easily they let things slip through their fingers. They may have thought they could always reach out tomorrow, or that an apology could come later. But your silence dismantles those assumptions, and suddenly there is no promise of later. In your absence, they are left wrestling with their regrets. They recall every moment they could have expressed care but didn't, every opportunity to show gratitude that was ignored, and every instance where they let their pride or ego get in the way. The finality of these lost chances is a bitter pill to swallow, and it begins to dawn on them just how fragile human connections truly are. Epictetus reminds us, "Don't hope that events will turn out the way you want. Welcome events in whichever way they happen. This is the path to peace." In the same way, the person left behind must learn to accept what is, rather than cling to what they hoped would be. They start to realize that they were not in as much control as they believed. You were not an endless resource, available whenever it suited them. Your absence is now a fact they must grapple with, a reality they can neither change nor manipulate. The fear of finality grows because they understand they can't control the outcome. They can only sit with what has already happened, powerless to rewrite the past. What makes this fear so powerful is not just the thought that you are gone, but the unsettling question, what if they were wrong about you all along? They start to realize they never really knew you or appreciated what you brought into their life. Their assumptions about your permanence were misplaced, and they are forced to confront the reality that they may never hear from you again. It is as if a door has been slammed shut without warning, and all they can do is stand on the other side, wondering what could have been. This fear gnaws at them, because they know that some losses are irreparable. Seneca put it simply, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it. This insight resonates deeply with those who are left behind, as they come to realize just how much time they wasted taking you for granted. Every moment they spent assuming you would always be there now feels like a squandered opportunity. This reflection is painful because in hindsight, it becomes clear that they had everything they needed to value you, but they failed to act when it mattered. In the end, the fear of finality teaches a harsh but necessary lesson. Nothing is guaranteed. Relationships are not defined by intentions, but by actions, and every choice, whether to act or remain silent, has consequences. When you disappear, they are left with only their thoughts, regrets, and the inescapable fear that you may never return. And perhaps the hardest part is knowing that if they had only seen your worth sooner, things could have been different. But now, it's too late. The silence is complete, and the fear of finality becomes a reminder that not everything lost can be recovered. Number 9. A desire to win you. Back when someone realizes you've disappeared from their life, it doesn't take long for a deep desire to win you back to settle in. At first, they may not fully understand the impact of your absence, but as time passes and the silence grows louder, they feel the void you left behind more intensely. People often don't appreciate what they have until it's gone, and when they finally recognize your value, the fear of losing you permanently becomes overwhelming. Their mind becomes consumed with the possibility that they have pushed you too far, that this time you are really gone, and the regret starts to eat away at them. This desire to reconnect isn't just about missing you. It's driven by the need to regain the control and familiarity they once had over the relationship. As Marcus Aurelius wisely said, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." Their thoughts will now become consumed with you, what went wrong, what they could have done differently, and how they can bring you back. The silence you've created acts as a powerful mirror, forcing them to see their own behavior clearly for the first time. They will start to reflect on the moments they ignored you, took your efforts for granted, or failed to show up when it mattered. The realization that you were not as secure in their life as they once assumed hits them hard. And now, with nothing left to cling to, their focus shifts entirely to figuring out how they can restore what was lost. The pursuit to win you back is often fueled by insecurity, regret, and a desperate need for closure. They'll start reaching out in small, seemingly innocent ways, perhaps a casual message, "How have you been?" text, or comments on your social media posts. But these small attempts are only the beginning. The longer you remain silent, the more frantic their efforts may become. As Seneca said, "It is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more, that is poor." They begin to crave your presence, your attention, and your validation. The emptiness they feel without you becomes unbearable, and the desire to win you back turns into an obsession. They may promise to change, express regret for how they treated you, or make grand gestures in hopes of rekindling what once was. However, by disappearing, you've already shifted the dynamic in a profound way. They no longer hold the power in the relationship. You do. Your absence shows them that you are not someone who can be taken lightly. This is a powerful realization for them because it disrupts the narrative they've built in their mind. They thought you would always be available, that no matter how they acted, you would never truly walk away. But now they are confronted with the unsettling truth that you are not as predictable or dependent on them as they believed. As Epictetus once said, "Wealth consists not in having great possessions, but in having few wants." In walking away, you demonstrate that your peace is more valuable than being in a situation where you are not fully appreciated. This, in turn, makes them realize how rare your presence was and how foolish they were to take it for granted. The irony is that the harder they try to pull you back into their world, the more they reveal their own insecurities. They may try to present themselves as changed, more considerate, or suddenly invested in your well-being. But as you've reclaimed your power, you can now see their efforts for what they truly are, attempts to soothe their own discomfort rather than genuine concern for your well-being. And that's the most important part of disappearing, recognizing that you don't need to be drawn back into their orbit just because they've realized your worth too late. As Marcus Aurelius reminds us, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Their desire to win you back may be strong, but your strength lies in your ability to stay grounded and aligned with your own values, regardless of their attempts to reconnect. In the end, the decision to let them back into your life or maintain your distance is yours to make. You've already proven that you are not an option, but a person of worth who cannot be easily replaced. Whether you choose to engage with them again or continue on your own path, one thing is certain: your absence has changed everything, and no matter how hard they try, they'll never forget what it felt like to lose you.